Hello, family members. Hope you're having a nice day today. I have a kind of complicated topic I want to discuss with you today, and so I hope you'll hear me out on it because it's something I think that there's a very broad misunderstanding about in our popular culture, and a better understanding would be helpful both for people in the community, just patients, and for doctors who are trying to diagnose illness. And of course, what we're going to be talking about is psychosomatic illness. Now, I imagine you've probably heard the term psychosomatic or psychosomatic illness before, and probably are well aware of the sort of popular understanding of the term. But I'm going to kind of summarize that just so we all are on the same page here. So often when people talk about psychosomatic illness, what they're doing is they're saying that, quote unquote, it's all in your head. That's the takeaway. It's a disease that either a person has completely conjured up in their own brain, or they're just lying about, or something like that. And that is not correct. Before I kind of get into why, I think I need to establish a little bit about my credentials as relates to this particular topic, because I do think that that's somewhat important. I have a degree in biology. Initially, I was going for a degree in pre-med, but there was some sort of like conflict with the classes at my particular school. And so I ended up just doing straight biology because of like one class or something. So I went into my undergrad with the intention of going to chiropractic college afterwards, which I did do, and I did graduate. I imagine a lot of people are unfamiliar with what a chiropractic education is in the United States, so let me just give you a little background on that specifically. I went to Palmer here in Florida, and more or less it's a 4-year program, but I went to school year round, and so I finished in like 3.5 years. You spend literally hours and hours and hours, hundreds of hours over the course of years in a gross anatomy lab. You learn every single bone in the human body. Probably most people wouldn't be surprised about that. You learn organs, vasculature, nervous tissue, everything, every muscles, everything, every part of the body you learn about in great detail. And another thing that people may not realize is that in a large part of the world, chiropractors can work as primary care physicians, which means that we have to be able to competently diagnose illness. We don't have to treat everything, but we have to know how to recognize how to treat people or where to refer people for further treatment or testing, uh, or, risk malpractice. Now, one way that you can know that chiropractic education is fairly efficient is that our malpractice rates are like super low compared to MDs. And, the insurance companies will tend to tell you if people have a habit of getting things wrong or hurting people, then their malpractice insurance is going to be ridiculous. So I hope that I've established well enough that because I'm coming at this from an academic perspective as a chiropractor, that you shouldn't just dismiss it because whatever you feel about the chiropractic treatment set aside, we are by law required to learn how to recognize illness and at the very least, who to refer them to, you know? So, psychosomatic illness, let's break down that word. Now, psycho, I'm sure most people are well aware that psycho is related to of the mind. You know, obviously there's the common misunderstanding or the common implication that psycho with psychopath, but you know, the psycho as just a word root, just as relating to the brain, to the mind. Somatic, probably far fewer people are aware what that means. Soma is body tissue. So psychosomatic is brain and body. So psychosomatic illness, what it is illness where physical symptoms are created by psychological conditions. So that's like if you get a migraine and you throw up, psychosomatic. So, you know, this idea that we can just throw out psychosomatic as being something real, as creating real illness and real sickness, is just very, very incomplete understanding of the term. And it makes it hard for us to discuss how psychiatric illness can cause physical symptoms. You know, in depression, there are a lot of physical symptoms from a psychosomatic or psychiatric disorder. It's not uncommon at all for many different types of psychiatric disorders to have physical, somatic side effects. Now, in the news, we're hearing all about Havana Syndrome. And obviously, I haven't actually studied patients with Havana Syndrome. I never practiced as a chiropractor. I ended up figuring out that it just really wasn't. When you're a chiropractor, you kind of got to be your own boss. And it's a lot about a lifestyle. You know, you got to do continuing ed, and you've got to, you know, work with insurance companies and da da da. And I realized I didn't want to work and I didn't want to live to work. I wanted to work as much as I had to support myself, and then go home at the end of the day and not have to think about it, you know? And so it just wasn't for me. And I'm not at all regretful of where I ended up, you know, where I was working before I got disabled and was unable to work anymore. But I really also feel like I learned a lot, and not just about, you know, chiropractic or science or anatomy or anything in the process of getting my education. So I don't regret any of that background. But I feel like we as a society have a tendency to not learn the meaning of words, but sort of absorb them by osmosis. And so it makes it very easy for concepts to be misunderstood. A lot of times when people talk about like psychosomatic illness, they almost in a way kind of they path a lot. I don't know. I'm gonna have to use a different word. My brain malfunction there. But they want to vilify the person who has the psychosomatic illness, and assume that there's some sort of conscious intent or conscious desire to deceive. And that's just not That's not how it works. A good example would be, say, a hysterical pregnancy. Uh, a hysterical pregnancy, if you don't know what that is where a person goes through basically all of the side effects that you would expect with a pregnancy, like morning sickness, abdominal weight gain, etc., etc., etc. But they're not actually pregnant. And it's not something that they just like convinced their body to do. Our brains and our bodies don't work like that. On some level, yes, there is a psychological phenomenon causing the physical somatic side effects. But in that case, that person is not being deceptive, not to anyone else, and certainly not to themselves. Their body is just acting the way that it's acting, and they don't have any control over that. And that's generally how it is with psychosomatic illness. It's not something anyone has any control over. It's real. It's not all made up. It's not just in your head. It's certainly, if it's just in your head, and it is not psychosomatic illness, because by very definition, there has to be some sort of actual physical symptom outside of just your head, But I think it speaks to how dismissive we are of, psychological illness to begin with. How any kind of invisible disability is easily overlooked or dismissed. I mean, that can be the same as just chronic illness, like people who have polycystic ovarian syndrome. Like, people, their symptoms in that particular scenario can be extremely disruptive to their life. But it's not something that you can necessarily see from the outside, and so people can be very dismissive of it. And that's, I think, the same sort of thing as psychosomatic illness. We have to get away from the idea that our brain is something that's always consciously under our own control. Our brains do some weird and wacky things that we have a very hard time understanding. Even if we can conceptualize it, really fully understanding it can be very difficult. When I was out of school, I had came across this book called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, which is a very dry read. I wouldn't recommend it, but it is fascinating. And it's about disorders of the brain that are sort of obscure. And one of them was a woman who's lost her sense of proprioception. Now, when it comes to senses, people are very mistaken there as well. Like, we have far more than 5 senses. I don't know why that ever came into being. I mean, your sense of balance, you ever think about that? That's a sense, pretty important sense. But proprioception is a sense that we have, you could kind of call it position sense. It's where I'm not looking at my hand, but I have some idea of where it's at, even if I couldn't see the camera. But, I know where my toes are without looking. That's proprioception. And the story in the book is about a woman who just one day her sense of proprioception just was gone. And there was nothing else wrong with her physically, but she couldn't move her body because she had no way of knowing where her body parts were. I mean, our brains can malfunction in weird ways that we've never even conceive of. And so that's why I think things like, say, Havana Syndrome are kind of interesting, because I think part of the reason why there's such broad disagreement about it is you have people who are looking at it from the perspective of it being fully a physical illness, or it's not real, or people who have a little more nuanced understanding of it. I personally believe it's a psychosomatic illness, one of those broad social phenomenons we see occasionally where, like a population will have a fear, and that fear turns to an anxiety, and that anxiety turns into physical symptoms, and those physical symptoms become contagious because everyone else in your population is having that same illness. And so you're going to have the anxiety that will lead to the psychosomatic manifestation of that illness the same that they did, potentially. I think that's most likely what's going on there. But if you were to say, I believe that that's most likely a psychosomatic illness, a lot of people are going to hear, I believe that they're faking, or they're lying, or that it's not real. And that's not true. Psychosomatic illness is very, very real for the patients who are affected by it. It's very, very much something they're not making up. And I think that this idea, this common misunderstanding that psychosomatic illness is somehow false or phony, or people suffering from psychosomatic illness don't deserve respect or aren't really feeling what they're feeling. I think that's why people can't come to a broad consensus, because there are going to be people who, if all evidence points to it being psychosomatic, who are going to be unable or unwilling to accept that as a potential answer because they feel like it's mischaracterizing something very real, which is not what saying something psychosomatic is. So anyway, that was a pretty long discussion of a fairly, I think, simple subject, but, well, not simple subject, but a simple statement, like psychosomatic illness is real illness. But anyway, have a fantabulous day, and I'll see you later.